So, I'm not a huge fan of huge weather variations that go on in a day. I think, in a very general sense, if I had my ideal conception of weather, it would be at most a 10-degree difference Fahrenheit, because I'm using Fahrenheit. I mean, I'm talking about in the same season, in the same day, in the same geographic location. If it's in a different season or a different place, of course there's going to be fluctuations, but I'm kind of frustrated because in a single day, the temperature will fluctuate 30 degrees, which I consider a lot. I consider that a lot. And it's, I guess, personally difficult for me to adapt to. I mean, okay, it's not that serious of a concern, but I'm aware of it. I'm aware of it. I bring this up not simply to bring this up, but I bring this up because it was on my mind, but also because I find it a relevant anecdote to address other things. Something I will address, for example, would be I've been applying, I don't know, because people always make it seem like, I feel like people faux love their job. Like, they play up how much they love the company and they love their job. And like, oh my god, like, awesome. Like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. And I guess I just don't inherently feel that way about any job I've had in my life. At least not for a prolonged, sustained period of time. I think it's easy to love anything in a short period of time, because in a short period of time you're not fully versed in everything that's involved, all of the good and all of the bad. You know, it's like when you meet someone new, it's not like you learn everything in that immediate instant. Most of the time you get mostly just the good parts. You know, when you meet like a stranger, like, you know, people try to show you their best of themselves, and then it's the same thing with jobs. You don't really figure out the parts that you don't like, or the stuff that you don't like, until a lot later on. Which isn't the worst thing necessarily, but it's more so that I'm aware of that reality, is what I'm getting at. Well, I've been aware of this for a while in terms of not particularly liking traditional work. I've talked about this before in terms of the whole not liking traditional work, the whole 9 to 5, having your primary source of income be a very specific person or whatever, no, company, whatever. And, you know, it doesn't really suit me. I'm a very independent person. I love autonomy. I think everyone loves autonomy. I was reading something. There was an article. I'm actually curious. Well, let me pull it up. It was a really interesting article. I'm going to pull it up. If I can find it. Here we go. Here we go. I found it. Because I fucking, what do you call it? I organize all of these articles that I like into, like, bookmarked folders in my browser, because I'm like that. I'm losing my voice right now. I have, like, a throat thing going on. I have, like, weird mucus, whatever. But the article I'm talking about, I'll link it, and it's an article that was published earlier this year in The Atlantic, and it's titled, "People Want Power Because They Want Autonomy." And this is something that I've been interested in a while, but it's not something that I really cared to understand on a very specific way, because I never really found it relevant. I think the first time this topic of power and why people want power probably came up in history class, because I remember when I was in high school, I started taking advanced placement AP classes, and in one of the first AP classes I took, there was this, okay, well, I love European history, I'll say. I took a lot of AP classes, but I don't really find most of them, what do you call it? Actually, no, all of them were really good. I guess I just don't talk about any of them except for this one class, because I feel like this one class identified a lot of themes that kind of really influence a lot of what I contemplate and think about. And so, okay, So, in this European history class that I had in high school, because so the thing about European history is that it's not that European history is so much more special than any other continent, but I mean, it's just the sort of thing where there wasn't like an Asian history class or an African history class, or there was an American history class, but that was something that I took in, what do you call it, middle school, and so it was something that I took an AP European history class, but no offense, American history isn't as exciting. I mean, when you think about it from a timeline perspective, European history has lasted longer than, like, by thousands of years than American history. Not that America didn't exist as long as European history has existed, but written record is what I'm getting at. Record that we acknowledge. I'm sure there's a lot of records by the Native Americans of American history, but I'm not familiar with very detailed accounts of that, and that wasn't something that was included in my American or U.S. history classes, so I don't really have information on that. With regards to European history, it was something that went back really, 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 really far, and it was something that had a really huge impact on me because in addition to that, I also took art history, AP art history, and, they kind of go hand in hand because when I studied European history, you get a very sort of, no, that's not the right word, well, it is analytic, but you get a sort of meta-analysis of what's going on. But then when you study art, you get to see the cultural impact of things. And, events affect ideas, and ideas affect events, and it goes both ways. It's not that just events affect ideas or just ideas affect events. Both affect each other, and there's this feedback loop is what I would say. And so it was interesting to me, and something that came up a lot in classes, in those two specific classes, were how you could see power displayed in both art, in literature, and in a lot of commentary, a lot of the culture. I'm not huge on just studying history, even though I do appreciate and understand history. I don't think I fully appreciate it in the context of just reading about events. I think I find history most interesting in studying the art and the culture of different periods, because when you study art, you really get a sense of a sort of psychological viewpoint of people, and so that's interesting for me. And so that worked out really well, studying art history and European history in close proximity, and power dynamics was something that came up a lot in terms of, well, there's a lot of books that I can think of. One that comes to mind immediately is Machiavelli and The Prince. And, okay, now that I say it, I actually can't think of anything aside from that. Okay, but the point of why I bring up European history and art history and this article by The Atlantic is because power is something that isn't unique to any sort of place or time or culture or species or civilization. It's something that exists, it's a dynamic that exists in any sort of context where any one more than one of one exists. And it's the sort of thing where, as a teenager taking classes, it wasn't something that I understood from firsthand experience because of my background in terms of I am fairly introverted. I generally prefer to isolate or to operate in sort of isolation. Not necessarily in isolation, but I guess I'm the sort of person where I don't interact for the sake of interacting. I interact because I enjoy it. And so if I don't enjoy it, then I'm not going to interact, that sort of thing. Whereas I feel in society, it's much more commonplace to do it for the sake of doing it without inherent enjoyment. But anyway, the point is that I never really had any sort of first-hand serious experience into the power dynamics at play in a lot of different situations, whether you're talking about on a very, very specific scale, very, very irrelevant, trivial, maybe funny scale. I think it's funny. When you think about plants and how plants fight each other for resources like water and nutrients and soil, and, that's why it affects gardening. So when you're gardening, if you plant your plants too closely together, it's possible that one of them will die because it's competing for its neighbor plant for resources. Or you could talk about on another different scale, like, what do you call it? Jobs. In a country, everyone needs a job. If everyone doesn't, there's this sort of competition going on. There's competition in everything. You think about romantic partners, there's competition. You think about it on a broader, like a much, much broader scale. You think about a competition for resources, like oil. Countries all the time are like super, super intense on vying for oil because it's really expensive and it's in demand, and so a lot of different companies. Initially, when I was younger, I thought that people wanted power because they wanted money. That's what I thought. Because when you're a kid, I guess I think I can still see elements of this today, where there's this idea that a certain figure, a certain dollar amount is something desirable because it offers you a level of comfort without having to budget or worry about things. That was a theory that I went with when I was younger, in my teenage years. As I got older, though, I started to disagree with my theory that people wanted power because... Wait, did I go through all of my theories on... Oh, whatever, who cares? I kind of make these on the spot. I don't premeditate these. I get too nervous to try to premeditate these, and I go on too many tangents. I think I go on tangents regardless, but I think I would go on more tangents if I premeditated this, but also I probably just wouldn't do it if I had to premeditate this, so I don't. I just do it on the spot because, yeah. Anyway, I think that people don't want power because they want money. I think people want power because they want absolute freedom over their life. When you think about life, if we lived in a world one of one, as in the world just existed of myself, or the world existed only of yourself, or the world only existed of one dog, or the world only existed of one plant, or whatever, or one whatever, there wouldn't be a need for power, because there wouldn't be a need for competition. There wouldn't be a need of fighting for limited resources. There wouldn't be a need to establish anything. When you think about the world and you think about resources, you think about how everything is a sum-zero game. There's a limited supply of money in the world. There's a limited supply of water in the world. There's a limited supply of food in the world. There's a limited supply of land in the world. At some point, you're going to reach the carrying capacity. There's a sum-zero gain in that if I have 1 acre of land in this specific city, then I'm taking 1 acre of land away from someone else in this specific city. Taking away may be the wrong way to phrase it. Instead of saying taking away, someone else can't have that 1 specific acre. The point that I'm getting at is that there's a limited supply, whatever it is. If one company owns access to oil in blah 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 region, then another person can't. Another company could in another region, but eventually there's going to get to a point where there's no more access and no more resources of that commodity. Whatever that commodity be, whether it's a specific food, a specific natural resource, a specific metal, whatever it is. And it's the same thing with currency. You know, if people just printed currency without any sort of limit, it would be worthless. The value of it would be worthless. Which is why there's such a huge, what do you call it? I don't know what they call this, but the whole effort to stop people from making fake money, and they try so hard to make real money so difficult to, counterfeit, there we go. They make it so hard to do that. So I don't think people want power because they want money. I think people want power because they want the freedom to do whatever they want. And everything that I've said makes it seem like that people want power for money. But as I continue, you'll see that I don't believe that, and I don't think you will either. And I don't think people want power because they want money, because I feel like I should come up with an example of someone really, really wealthy who... Okay, well, I'll put it this way. I do think money can give you autonomy and can give you freedom, but I think if people had freedom and had autonomy without massive wealth, that would be sufficient. I don't think you need money to have power, to have autonomy, but I do think you need power to have autonomy. But you can have power without having massive wealth. If you think about political figures, like, okay, let's think about the most recent U.S. Barack Obama. He has power and he has autonomy, but he doesn't have massive wealth. If you look at his net profit, it's I think it was like $7 million, which is a lot of money. That is a lot of money. But comparatively to other people who have a lot of power and autonomy, like Mark Zuckerberg, or Warren Buffett, or George Soros, they're worth billions with a B. 1 million or 1,000 $1,000 million is 1 billion. So it's like a huge, vast differential. Money is definitely a way to equip oneself with power and to equip oneself with autonomy. But that isn't the only way. It tends to be a very secure way, though, which is why there's a level of freedom that you do get with money. And I think the freedom that you do get with money doesn't come from the existence of the money itself, but it comes from the independent wealth that you have. When you have money, there loses the sense that you need someone else to help you, that you need someone else to basically give you opportunities to build it. And I recognize that I'm not a very compromising person in terms of I'm not willing to compromise what I consider to be, I'm not willing to compromise myself in terms of I'm not willing to tolerate what I perceive as disrespectful situations or disrespectful conversations. And I recognize I opt out of a lot of opportunities that I could take on because of this quality about myself. And I am confrontational, I am aware of that. But I think for the most part, people are more willing to tolerate it in terms of bad behaving employers. This is something that I've mentioned before, and I bring it up because I don't feel I want money because of necessarily the money. I feel like I want money because I want the freedom to not have to compromise my values. When you're independently wealthy without the need of outside help, outside opportunities, there's a level in which you develop the ability to really only engage in the world in ways that fully align with your value system and your objectives and goals. And I recognize that's something that's not completely commonplace in our world, but it's something that I feel people want more than the money itself. I think if you asked most people how much money they wanted, they would probably tell you the biggest number that they could say or see in their head. And I don't feel like money is really valuable in and of itself. Not personally. I think personally I value respect much more than I ever value money. And it's a huge deal for me, because I recognize that I think for me respect is a very broad word that means a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. But part of it includes not willing to compromise my values, goals, objectives, or what I care about for the sake of anything. And there's an element of idealism or an element of naivety to that sort of mindset. But at the same time, I don't have any intention of letting it go. Okay, that's all I wanted to talk about. I don't like these being too long, but they're kind of being long. They're like 20 minutes each now, which I don't mind, but I'm just gonna go with it. Okay. And I'm gonna head out in a second. These are audio at the moment, so I'm making them podcast, whereas I could make them into something non-podcast form, but I kind of like them being in podcast form, so I think I'm going to keep them in podcast form. Podcast form being audio only. And I think I should make a SoundPound or what is it called? SoundCloud? So it could be a proper podcast, because, podcasts have. But, yeah. So I think I'm going to keep these in podcast form because I like podcast form, because I listen to podcasts myself. And I think I'm only going to record full-fledged with audio and visual if I'm doing something that I find it relevant with, like if I'm playing a sport or maybe if I'm in a new locale. But nothing like that's very interesting is happening right now, so I think prototypical podcast format is fine.